The transvaluation. If one does not feel love for the esoteric work, it is impossible to create a point of contact between the Gnostic work and our lives. This obviously means that we will not work on ourselves. We will feel fine just reading some books and attending some public lectures, and this is the problem. When the teachings that are given here and in the books are not used, obviously, it is impossible to comprehend what Gnostic work really is. Let us remember the parable of the merchant of the Christic gospel. The merchant wanted to buy a precious pearl, but it happened that at that moment he did not have enough money. So what did he do? He sold all of his goods, everything with the intention of buying it, and obviously he did. The Gnostic esoteric work is like that precious pearl. In order to attain it, one has to live all kinds of secondary interests. In order to attain it, one has to leave all kinds of secondary interests and attractions behind. In order to attain it, one has to leave all kinds of secondary interests and attractions behind. One has to devote their life to Gnostic work. One has to devote their life to the Gnostic work. Knowing that we have different psychological aggregates that personify greed and anger and lust and pride and envy, gluttony, laziness, and so on, and that each one of them has its psychic energy involved in different interests. Each one of them pushes in a different direction. Then one has to liberate their psyche, their psychic energy trapped in each one of those different values. If one obtains its liberation, then one can concentrate on that precious pearl, the Gnostic esoteric work. When one liberates the energy and takes it away from the material and egotistical interests, when one takes it from passionate desires or things that have no worth, when one concentrates this energy in just one direction, the Gnostic work, then obviously one crystallizes the communion with the work. Then one begins to work on oneself seriously. Of course, this brings about a radical transformation. It is necessary to understand all of this if we really yearn liberation. Obviously, to the Gnostic, or to love the Gnostic work is fundamental. When we talk about love, we have to be exact in the meaning of it. Do not forget that I like to be precise in the investigation and in the use of the words. The word love is a little bit abstract. We need to analyze it in order to know what love really is. The great Kabir, Jesus, said, "In loving one another, you will be my disciples." There is also another sentence from the great Kabir, "Love God above all things, and love your neighbors as you love yourself. Do not unto your neighbor as you would not have him or her do unto you." When people hear the word love, they feel that something touches their hearts. But since their mentality is subjective and since there is not objectiveness in their thoughts, obviously they do not perceive the profound meaning of that word. It is absolutely necessary to understand what love really is. The phrase, "do not unto your neighbor as you would not have them do unto you," could be translated as being conscious of others and yourself. And the phrase, "love God above all and love your neighbor as yourself," could be translated as being conscious of your internal divinity, your fellow man, and yourself. So we have to be conscious of the meaning of the word love, and that can also be translated as love itself can be translated as consciousness. How could one love his or her fellow men? that is to say, to understand them. If one is not conscious of them, we have to become more conscious of our fellow man if we, in reality, want to understand them. Only in this form will we really feel love for them. However, in order to become conscious of our fellow men, first we have to become conscious of ourselves. If a person is not conscious of him or herself, how can it be that they will be conscious of their fellow men? How could it be possible to understand them? If they do not understand them, what would be their behavior in relation to them? We have to feel affection for the Gnostic esoteric work. But this affection would not exist if we do not understand the work. So comprehension is fundamental. Therefore, I have to say that there are three kinds of love. When Jesus Christ asked some of his disciples about the kind of love that they felt for him, it is necessary to understand that there exists the sexual love, the emotional love, and conscious love. We say love is law, but conscious love. Many people relate themselves only through sex, that is the sexual love. There are others that have their gravity center in their emotions. In other words, they develop the emotional love. That kind of love is unstable and is full of bitterness and passion, jealousy, and anger, and so on. It could not be classified as intelligent love. And of course, sexual love, if it is inferior, it is lust. It is not love. It's one of the furthest things from love, in fact. Undoubtedly, only the conscious love deserves our veneration. But in order for it to exist, it is indispensable to work on ourselves and to eliminate the undesirable psychic aggregates. Otherwise, it could not exist. This conscious love within ourselves, because the aggregates trap the consciousness. They trap our love, our capacity, and our perception. Or rather, they obscure our perception. How could a distrustful or emotional or jealous person feel conscious love? Conscious love can be born in ourselves when we eliminate the elements of passion, jealousy, fights, and more. It is necessary to put ourselves into our fellow man's point of view. How hard is it to learn to put oneself into our fellow man's point of view? How hard? The one that learns to feel conscious love knows how to put themselves into their fellow man's point of view. The phrase, "do not unto your neighbor as you would not have them do unto you," has to be translated as, be conscious of your fellow man and yourself. If one does not put oneself into our fellow man's point of view, one fails. One will never love somebody consciously. In order to put ourselves into our fellow man's point of view, we have to take away self-esteem. Unfortunately, self-esteem is a characteristic, a strong one that we have. It is obvious that we have to eliminate level by level the different aspects of pride. A great part of love that a man and a woman feel for each other is just an extension of self-esteem. The I of the self-esteem has to be eliminated. It has to be disintegrated. It has to be returned to dust if we really want to learn how to see others' point of view. Normally, nobody sees the other person's point of view. Nobody knows how to put themselves in others' shoes. Everybody is so dominated by the I of self-esteem and pride that not even remotely do they try to put themselves in other people's shoes, in other people's point of view. This I must be eliminated if we truly want to understand other people's point of view. Normally, nobody sees the point of view because we live so dominantly by the I, by the ego of pride, that we're incapable of putting ourselves in their place. If one takes a great step and eliminates their pride, and if one achieves the elimination of those psychological aggregates that personify arrogance and intolerance and superiority, obviously we will attain extraordinary progress, because arrogance itself makes us feel superior and even behave like despots. It's an obstacle to consciousness awakening. An arrogant person could never love his fellow man. How could he if he is arrogant? What about superiority? What could we say about that? Why should we feel so important if we are just miserable worms in the mud of the earth? The superiority, to feel superior to others, is an obstacle to awakening. What about intolerance? We see the defects of our fellow men, but not ours. We can see the mote that is in our fellow men's eyes, but we do not perceive the beam that is in our own eye. Only when one puts oneself in the other's point of view does one learn to be more tolerant with others. And as a result, the destructive and harmful criticisms disappear. Therefore, it is essential to learn how to place ourselves in the other person's point of view. Did somebody steal something? Are you sure that you have never stolen? Who could say that? Did a friend have an extramarital relationship? Are we sure that never in our lives we have adulterated? A person is behaving incorrectly. Are we sure that we have never done the same in the past? Of course, when one develops tolerance, the destructive criticism disappears. Therefore, we need the development of tolerance, and in order to do so, it is necessary to eliminate the psychological aggregates of intolerance. Only in this way will tolerance be born in us. And one is amazed to see how many other people criticize, and how they criticize. If we could place ourselves in the other's point of view, if for a moment we could change our personality to the other person's, we would no longer criticize. It is important to put ourselves in the other person's point of view. That is indispensable. Unfortunately, people do not know how to do this. What really counts is the consciousness. Consciousness is love. Love and consciousness are two parts of the same thing. If one really intends to become conscious of oneself, one will become conscious of others. How amazing is it, for example, to observe the behavior of those that torture others? How unconscious are they? When they torture somebody, to themselves they are doing that. If one tortures somebody, later it will be their turn to be tortured. One has to deserve, or rather observe, all those aspects if in reality one wants to progress in the being's field. When we approach the Gnostic esoteric work, there is a frightful fight between past values and the work that we have to do. As I said, there are multiple interests in the economic and political, social, passionate fields, and so on, and that is the obstacle that we have to overcome to get to the level in which one leaves everything because of the Gnostic work. That is fundamental. That's the level that we need to be at. We need to be able to give everything up. Unfortunately, people do not think in that manner. Normally, students lose long periods of time between the past and the future, among the past values and the esoteric work. This situation creates something, I would say, amorphous, incoherent, in which the student wants to work on him or herself, but is not devoted to the work. People have lost a lot of time. However, there are some that decide to leave everything for the precious pearl. We need a transvaluation on our life of the values that we have in it in order to later work seriously on ourselves. The transvaluation is important. What do we understand about transvaluation? What is the meaning of this word? Well, we valorize our interests, but transvaluation means something else. It is the comprehension, the understanding that our economic, social interests, and so on are something useless and vain, and that the work is more important than anything. Through the transvaluation, one leaves many egotistic interests, one devotes oneself to the great work because of comprehension. Obviously, the Buddhist annihilation is fundamental. Theosophists do not like this sentence, "to die here and in all the worlds is painful." But it is necessary to pass through the great Buddhist annihilation, not to feel fear of death. And of course, letting go of the attachments that bind us to samsara and rebirth. Unfortunately, people have a fear of death and unconsciously resist these teachings. You are listening, but are you sure that you are not putting some resistance to my explanation about the Gnostic esoteric work? Are you sure that you are not bored or yawning? Do you not feel that the teaching is becoming a little bit dry? In contrast, if now I begin talking about a lotto, or how to attain a better financial situation, or how to be successful in love or something like that, I'm sure that you would not yawn. But when I am talking about the work itself and the Buddhist annihilation, deep inside each one of you appears a resistance. Why? Because the ego does not want to die. The ego rejects this kind of teaching because it is pointing against its very own existence. Are there some of you that would not want to exist? You want to exist here and in the other worlds. Some of you would say, well, I do not want to exist in the physical world. I would like to die. But what secret desire made you think in that way? Is it because you would like to live in the superior worlds? And of course, in a better situation? Why do the clergy have such large congregations? Because they do not teach the doctrine of the Buddhist annihilation. They offer heaven by means of payment. For example, if the widow leaves a good fortune to the parish, she gives it hoping for a passport to heaven, a good life in the other world. A person could have been a killer, a criminal, but just with the confession, she gets a passport to heaven. Now, if we leave some money, we can go right to heaven, not even passing through purgatory. That attracts, people enjoy that. It is very popular because the ego does not like to be sentenced to death. For example, I received many letters from Central and South America. They ask about chakras, initiations, about powers, social positions in the Gnostic movement, financial situations. They ask me about love, and so on. I have almost never received a letter asking about the elimination of the ego. Everybody asks for powers, grades, initiations, money, positions, and so on. But I do not find even one letter from someone that could be totally devoted to the ego's elimination. Yes, sir, they want to live, but not to die. Everybody wants to live. What they want is to be a great lord, powerful, a god or demigod, but not dying beforehand. It happens that only with death does the new arrive, however. If the seed does not die, the plant cannot be born. But they do not want to understand. Some in their letters say that they cannot go into the astral consciously, that they want to attain illumination, that they still are not able to receive the messages from the superior worlds, etc. They do not want to understand, however, that illumination cannot be achieved if beforehand the consciousness has not been liberated. They do not want to understand that the consciousness can never be liberated if first the ego is not eliminated. They want to attain illumination, but they do not want to die. How useful could those schools that do not teach about the death of the myself be? Therefore, if one does not die, one is losing time in a miserable form. In order to die in oneself, one has to love their work. They have to feel affection toward it. The consciousness trapped in the ego among the different psychic aggregates processes itself according to its own conditions. Obviously, while one has the consciousness trapped in the ego, one is abnormal and has abnormal psyche. Constantly we hear about people that have been taken by extraterrestrials, those that have been taken and transported in spaceships, coming back and always saying that they were in laboratories. They're always examined in a laboratory and later they're set free. They take a walk and later they are returned. It is clear that those huge spaceships commanded by the brothers of the other worlds have marvelous laboratories. However, why do they take terrestrials and put them in the laboratories? Have you ever thought about that? Well, it is because the terrestrials are beings that have an abnormal psyche. We, the terrestrials, in a state of fascination. That is the reason. It is obvious. The abnormality of our humanity catches the attention of the extraterrestrials, and they take them in order to study us in their laboratories. These extraterrestrials are the normal people. That is the fact of the matter. In archaic times, the psyche of the three-brained beings was normal. Then humanity was in harmony with other planetary humanities or civilizations. But unfortunately, after the elimination of the abominable Kundalti Gwador organ that humanity had received with the intention of stabilizing the geological layer of the Earth, the psyche became abnormal because the consequences of that organ remained in the 5 cylinders of the human machine. That consequence is the ego. The consciousness trapped inside the ego began working in an abnormal form, developing tremendously, and it unfortunately remains in that form, very perverse and very developed. Our intention is to create normal creatures, to make them get out of the psychic abnormality which they are in. Let us observe the many terrestrial abnormalities. One of them is intolerance. It is incorrect to see the other's sins and not to see the defects that we have. If we see a defect in somebody, for sure we also have it. The criticism about the thoughts or projects of our fellow man without previous evidence is an abnormality. If one observes, for example, a determinate behavior, why should one judge it? The facts by themselves can be understood once they are examined with the sense of the psychological self-observation. In that form, we could understand the facts in their total form. In proportion to our advance on this path, we understand that our fellow men are abnormal. The gossips, the rumors exist just here on Earth. The gossip and the rumors do not exist among normal people. This is normal only in a world in which people are abnormal. Let us observe how the minds react, one against the other. We have observed that when somebody says something to another person, the other reacts in a violent manner. He or she feels injured in the self-esteem. That is abnormal. And mind you, we do this in a very petty way over the smallest things, with little self-control in the way that we respond. We don't respond, actually, we react. That too, very abnormal, very perverse, out of control. In an advanced world of space, if somebody says something, the person keeps silent, does not discuss, because everybody is free to say anything they want. On a certain occasion, I was speaking, this was about 30 years ago, with the angel Anael, in the superior worlds about certain virtues that I thought I had and that I did not. Anil, after some observation, and very correct, made me see my mistake because I was still accustomed to terrestrial discussions and obviously objected to it. I used all my eloquence, but Anil was in silence, just listening. When I finished my speech, he reverently turned his back and went out. He did not say a thing. He had said what he had to say, and he let me say all that I wanted to say. How many things did I say? Many. But he respectively kept in silence. He listened to me with decency, turned his back, and went away. I remember that I was dictating a conference in the superior worlds. I was speaking about Tantra and Tantrism, about the secret sectorium of the alchemist sanctuary. It was then we were visited by Shivananda that had died recently. He said, "You see, you are vulgarizing the knowledge." That is to say, because we were teaching the key of alchemy. The teaching cannot be vulgarized, he said. In unusual form, I said to him, "I am ready to answer all the questions. The discussion is open." Shivananda had the good sense, even though he was a terrestrial, to take a seat in the Oriental style and to perform a profound meditation, rather than continuing criticizing. Moments later, I felt that somebody was scratching inside of my head, and I saw there it was, the yogi in profound meditation. He finished his meditation, he stood up, and went to me, and embracing me, he said, "I have understood your message that you are giving to humanity. I agree with you, Samael, and I will recommend your books to everybody. I understood it." I also embraced him, and I said, "I also hold you in high esteem, Shivananda." Of course, Shivananda is terrestrial, but has more judgment than others. At least, he does not behave as a terrestrial. He is an extraordinary mystic, with an extraordinary aptitude. Well, my dear brothers, one becomes comprehensive when one eliminates the eyes. It is obvious. When one learns to see the other's point of view and becomes tolerant, so too he disappears with the destructive criticism, and so on. One becomes normal and behaves in a completely different manner when one destroys the ego. To observe how people react one against the other is something that produces pain. If somebody says something, the other reacts. It hurts. And all of this is seen only in our world, in which there are abnormal psyches, because where there are normal psyches, this does not happen. Reflect, my dear brothers. Think. Love the esoteric work. If you do not really love the work, there will never be a conjunction between your lives and the work. Never, as a matter of fact, will you understand the work. Therefore, it is necessary to comprehend. We, the instructors, want you to pass through the Buddhist annihilation. We want you to awaken consciousness. Meanwhile, as you have not passed through the Buddhist annihilation, it means that you are going very wrong. If you ask me about your progress, I would have to say that it is really bad. Why? Because I see you all very alive, and that is serious. While one is alive, one cannot understand others, cannot make authentic investigations. One walks in the world of subjective opinions, and the concepts are incoherent, not exact. Subjective. Obscure. When one dies, as a self, as an ego, one dies here and in all the worlds. Do you think that the alive, as alive as you are, you can attain a nirvana? Obviously not. Nirvana is in heaven. That is why the Buddhists say the elimination of the ego is nirvana. Today, I have underlined the work. As homework, I give you the elimination of the I. of self-esteem, of pride. That is fundamental. And also the other I's, called intolerance, arrogance, self-importance. Why should we feel important? Are any of us really important the way we are right now? As I have said in previous lectures, we are miserable worms. Think of the arrogance. The importance and the intolerance are obstacles to loving our fellow man. It is indispensable for you to eliminate emotional love and to achieve conscious love. That is fundamental. Emotional love is full of plenty of jealousy and passion. That is not love. That is pain. Conscious love is necessary. Although I am boring with such repetition, I must say to you that we must learn to love our fellow men.